Can you see? Yes. Okay, so some of the people here are already very familiar with what I'm going to show. This is a glimpse of my PhD project that links armed conflicts and urbanization and sustainable development, with a focus on African cities and a case study about Pemba in northern Mozambique. So today I bring you a presentation of 5 parts, which starts with a very brief situation of the armed insurgency that emerged in Cabo Delgado province in northern Mozambique in 2017 and spread across the province. At the peak of the violence so far in 2022, which is the period that I'm focusing on for my PhD, almost half of the population of this province, around 1 million people, were displaced. And today I will not dwell on the background and the drivers and motivations of this conflict. I guess that maybe Enrique will address something about that in his presentation, because there is a lot of very good research being conducted on that, and my focus is on the urban dimension of the conflict, so it's what I'm going to show you today. This study is based on the premise that cities are central for sustainable development, as stated in several international agendas, and due to the transformative nature of conflict-induced urbanization, the impact, I set out to analyze the implications of conflict-induced urbanization to the development of African cities. In other words, how do African cities develop because of armed conflicts, taking the case of Pemba. So the phenomenon of conflict-induced urbanization corresponds to the acceleration of urbanization processes when armed conflicts happen in rural areas and people seek refuge in cities, which leads to sudden population growth and violent transitions from rural to urban lifestyles. This accelerated urbanization has impacts on the demography, the landscapes, the infrastructure, the environment, the socialities, the economies, and the governance of these refuge cities. And these impacts are ever more impactful, well, are felt deeper in small and intermediate cities, such as Pemba, due to their close relationship with the hinterland, the province, the rural areas where the conflict is happening. And these impacts have then implications for future development. Now, looking at the literature about sustainable urban development, there is a contemporary critique to its mainstream definition, which is based on the Brundtland's report. And this critique points to the Western-centric, donor-driven, one-size-fits-all approach of mainstream sustainable development without recognition for local contexts and needs, which then translates in a conflict between sustainability policy and development needs, especially in rapidly urbanizing areas, such as the African continent, among other examples. This critique is based on a sudden turn in urban studies that advocates to understand cities globally through their unique contexts, the importance of place and locality for urban theory, and the political economy of knowledge production. This sudden turn in the urban studies is enmeshed in the predominant modes of urbanization in these rapidly urbanizing regions, such as informality, hybridity, and urban-rural continuums. This paradigm change calls for contextually grounded sustainable development that is holistic, inclusive, and pro-poor, with a focus on infrastructure, governance, and land tenure for sustainable governance. So within this theoretical background, I conducted this case study in Pemba, which is the capital, the provincial capital and largest settlement of the province of Cabo Delgado. And it's classified as a secondary city in the Mozambique urban system. Its history traces back to ancient settlements before the 19th century, and its development, it's linked to the Portuguese colonialism, the Mozambican independence, the 16-year civil war, and the more recent discovery of oil and gas reservoirs off the coast of Cabo Delgado. In this study, I found that we are assisting at a new phase. We are seeing a new phase in the development of Pemba due to doubling of its urban population in just 5 years, because it became the main destination for displaced persons by this insurgency. Many displaced persons came from the northern coast of Cabo Delgado by sea and tended to settle around the city center, while people displaced from inland districts came by road and tended to settle in the peri-urban areas. In addition, fishers tended to settle in the seaside, traders and business people in the city center, and farmers in the bayside and the periphery. Of course, this is a generalization. There is a cross mix of occupation. And in parallel, there was also the emergency of a humanitarian hub in premium locations around the city. So we see that in Pemba, the choice of destination by displaced persons is a consequence of origin and pre-displacement occupation, which are both related to ethnic cultural belonging and family links. So people go where they have family, which is related to the ethnic cultural groups to which they belong, which influences also their occupation and where they come from. So, and this is said in Pemba, that Pemba is a mirror of the province in the relationship between ethnicity, culture, and occupation and geography, let's say. So now, here we have the dimensions of conflict-induced urbanization ranked by decreasing order of frequency by which they were mentioned by the participants of the study. So we can see that in Pemba, governance and economic issues were the dimensions most affected by the conflict, while issues related to humanitarianism and the environment were less frequent in the participants' discourses. In a nutshell now, governance expresses the relationships between inhabitants and authorities, both municipal and customary, and how these relationships are affected by the war. Frequently mentioned topics were urban planning, land tenure, and the functioning of public services. The economic impacts of the conflict result mostly from rapid population growth and interferences in the rural-urban linkages, and manifest mostly in supply and trade networks, employment opportunities, and livelihood strategies. Social changes manifest simultaneously in disruptions and consolidations of relationships due to the war through community networks, kinship ties, and religious practice. Infrastructure plays a vital role in urban life, and it was frequently mentioned the additional pressure caused by the conflict, especially in roads and transportation services, housing conditions, and water and energy supply. Changes in the urban landscape result from the historical interdependence between Pemba and the province of Cabo Delgado, and manifest mostly in urban densification or expansion through the choices of destination by the displaced persons that I showed in that map before. Demography expresses the transformations in population composition due to this mass displacement, particularly in ethnic cultural heterogeneity and changes in the gender ratio in the city, as most of the displaced persons are women and children. The arrival of international organization influences the urban fabric, on one hand through community projects that improve public services and facilities for all, both residents and displaced persons, but also on the other hand, through this new aid industry that changes the local economy and the socialities related to it. Finally, the theme of environment translates the challenges in governance and infrastructure management, especially in sanitation, drainage, and solid waste. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, these impacts of the armed conflict have implications for the future development of small and intermediate cities, such as Pemba. So, looking at the dimensions of conflict-induced urbanization as ranked by the participants of this study, from this southern approach to sustainable development, urban governance should be based on co-production and collaboration between municipal authorities and community and customary organizations. Economic opportunities should extend beyond mainstream growth-centric models, focusing on reestablishing traditional trade routes in supply chains and simplified processes for informal activities to access municipal markets. Social cohesion would benefit from a dialogue between residents and newcomers and different generations of citizens to bridge traditional values with contemporary aspirations. Because infrastructure is essential for sustainable development, priority should be placed in rehabilitation and maintenance, community managed systems, and public-private partnerships to achieve flexible systems for expansion and to implement adaptive consumption modalities that can be more useful for the capabilities of residents and displaced persons. In what regards to landscape, urban planning should extend beyond the administrative boundaries of the city to encompass the peri-urban areas and the circular migration, which is a very strong reality in Pemba, in Mozambique in general, but in Pemba in particular, and adopt simplified processes for land access and construction licensing. Displaced persons may choose to return to their origins. This is the official narrative and the pressure for most of the displaced persons to return. But so far, the majority has chosen to stay in Pemba, to resettle in Pemba, or to resettle somewhere else that is not their origins. So housing and livelihoods are medium and long-term needs to be addressed, with a focus on youth and gender-sensitive initiatives, because youth is the majority of the population, and women and children are the majority of displaced persons in Pemba. The transition from humanitarian to development demands a handover from aid agencies to local institutions, and this can be an opportunity, if tackled, to strengthen these local institutions. But this demands also a coordination between municipal, provincial, and national authorities. And finally, environmental sustainability in Pemba must address climate resilience, especially in infrastructure. And there is this opportunity to link environmental education and waste management to livelihood and business opportunities to make it more effective. So in conclusion about conflict and development in the city of Pemba, we see that conflict-induced urbanization is a multidimensional phenomenon that poses challenges and opportunities for sustainable development. We see that rapid urbanization, which is a trend in the African continent, is amplified by armed conflicts, and in Pemba in particular, for which the definition of urban policy, which is something that is still in the primary stage, the existence of urban policy is essential for effective development. The implications of this conflict-induced urbanization demand contextually grounded, community-based, and livelihoods-oriented policy. And this leads me to the final step of my research, which is what I'm conducting now, to critically analyze the development policy that already exists in Mozambique, territorial policy, the beginning of urban policy, how these instruments address these dimensions of conflict-induced urbanization, and if they address it in a mainstream sustainable development approach, or in a contextually grounded, let's call it, Southern approach to sustainable development, which according to the African and Southern urbanists would be a more, it's the only way to develop sustainably in African cities. So I thank you very much.